The grand ballroom of the Riverside Country Club sparkled under crystal chandeliers as wealthy families gathered for the annual charity gala. Women in designer gowns mingled with men in expensive suits, their laughter echoing off marble walls adorned with oil paintings worth more than most people's homes. The event was meant to raise money for disabled children, though most attendees seemed more interested in showing off their wealth than actually helping anyone. Maya Chun adjusted her wheelchair at a corner table, watching the crowd with quiet observation. At 17, she had learned to read people quickly. The slight tilt of someone's head when they noticed her chair. The way conversation stopped when she rolled past. The forced smiles that never reached anyone's eyes. Tonight felt no different, despite her mother's insistence that attending would be good for her social development. Her parents, Dr. Michael Chun and Dr. Sarah Chun, were prominent surgeons who believed exposure to high society would benefit their daughter's future. They moved through the crowd with practiced ease, discussing medical innovations with other doctors while Maya sat alone, picking at her untouched dinner. "Look at her just sitting there," whispered Jessica Morrison, a popular girl from Maya's private school. She stood near the dessert table with 3 other teenagers, all children of the club's most influential members. Why would anyone bring someone like that to a party? Brittany Walsh, whose father owned half the commercial real estate in the city, giggled behind her manicured hand. "My mom says it's so embarrassing when disabled people come to nice events. They make everyone uncomfortable." Tyler Richmond, son of a prominent judge, smirked as he sipped champagne stolen from his parents' table. "She probably can't even dance. What's the point of being at a party if you can't do normal things?" The 4th member of their group, Amanda Foster, whose mother was the country club's social coordinator, nodded in agreement. "Daddy always says charity cases should know their place. This isn't a hospital or whatever." Maya pretended not to hear their comments, though each word stung like a physical blow. She had dealt with cruel teenagers before, but tonight felt different. The elegant setting seemed to make their words more poisonous, as if the beautiful surroundings gave them permission to be ugly inside. Across the room, Grace Washington moved quietly between tables, refilling water glasses and collecting empty plates. At 55, she had worked at the country club for over 20 years, watching generations of wealthy families celebrate their success while treating service staff as invisible. Her dark uniform was pressed and spotless, her graying hair pulled back in a neat bun, and her movements were efficient and professional. Grace had noticed the teenagers gathering near Maya's table, their body language shifting from casual conversation to something more predatory. She had seen this behavior countless times before. Privileged children who had never faced real consequences for their actions, testing boundaries to see how much cruelty they could get away with. "Someone should tell her parents she doesn't belong here," Jessica said, her voice growing bolder as her friends encouraged her with their laughter. "This is supposed to be a classy event." Maya felt her cheeks burning with embarrassment and anger. She wanted to leave, but her parents were across the room, deep in conversation with potential donors for their medical research. Moving her wheelchair through the crowded ballroom would draw even more attention, something she desperately wanted to avoid. The teenagers began moving closer to Maya's table, their confidence growing with each step. Other guests seemed oblivious to the developing situation, too absorbed in their own conversations, and networking to notice 4 teenagers circling a disabled girl like predators. Grace continued her work, but her attention was fully focused on the unfolding drama. She had raised 3 children of her own and had worked with countless families over the years. She could predict exactly where this confrontation was heading, and she knew the adults in the room would likely do nothing to stop it. "Hey," Jessica said, approaching Maya's table with her friends flanking her like bodyguards. "This is a private party for important families. Are you sure you're supposed to be here?" Maya looked up, her dark eyes flashing with intelligence and barely controlled anger. "My parents are Dr. Michael and Dr. Sarah Chun. They're on the hospital board and major donors to this event." Brittany laughed, a sound like breaking glass. "Just because your parents have money doesn't mean you belong in normal social situations. This is awkward for everyone." "Yeah," Tyler added, emboldened by his friend's cruelty. "No offense, but seeing someone like you at a party just makes everyone uncomfortable. It's kind of selfish." Maya's hands gripped her wheelchair's armrest so tightly her knuckles turned white. She had been born with spina bifida, a condition that affected her spine and left her unable to walk. Despite this, she was an honor student, an accomplished artist, and volunteered at a local animal shelter. Her disability was just one part of who she was, but these teenagers saw it as her only defining characteristic. "I have every right to be here," Maya said quietly, her voice steady despite the rage building inside her. "This is supposed to be a charity event for disabled children. Maybe you should think about that." Amanda stepped forward, her expensive jewelry catching the chandelier light. "Just because it's charity for people like you doesn't mean you have to actually show up. It's embarrassing for everyone involved." The conversation was attracting attention from nearby tables, but not the kind of help Maya needed. Some adults glanced over with mild curiosity, while others deliberately looked away, unwilling to get involved in what they saw as a minor teenage disagreement. Grace finished clearing a nearby table and moved closer, her professional demeanor masking the anger building inside her. She had watched these particular teenagers treat service staff with contempt for years, snapping their fingers for attention and leaving messes for others to clean up. But this was different. This was outright cruelty directed at someone who couldn't easily defend herself. "Look," Jessica said, her voice growing louder and more confident. "We're trying to be nice about this, but you're making everyone uncomfortable. Maybe you should ask your parents to take you home early." Maya felt tears threatening to spill from her eyes, but she refused to give these bullies the satisfaction of seeing her cry. She had faced discrimination before, but never so publicly or with such calculated cruelty. "I'm not going anywhere," she said firmly. "I belong here just as much as anyone else." Tyler laughed, the sound harsh and mocking. "Come on, be realistic. Look around. Do you see anyone else here who looks like you?" The comment hung in the air like poison gas, spreading its toxicity to anyone within earshot. Grace felt her professional composure cracking as she watched the attack intensify. She had dealt with racism throughout her career, enduring countless indignities from people who barely acknowledged her humanity. But watching these privileged teenagers torment a disabled girl crossed a line she couldn't ignore. Brittany moved even closer to Maya's wheelchair, her designer dress rustling with each step. "Honestly, it's kind of embarrassing for your parents too. They probably feel obligated to bring you. But everyone's talking about how weird it is." Maya's composure finally began to crack. These weren't just random cruel comments. They were calculated attacks designed to make her feel worthless and unwelcome. The teenagers had identified her deepest insecurities and were weaponizing them with surgical precision. "Stop it," Maya whispered, her voice barely audible above the party's background noise. Jessica leaned down, bringing her face level with Maya's, her voice dropping to a cruel whisper. "Maybe next time your parents will get a babysitter instead of dragging their crippled daughter to adult events." The word hit Maya like a physical blow, and she gasped audibly. Around the ballroom, conversations continued, laughter echoed off the walls, and waiters served champagne to oblivious guests. But at Maya's table, for teenagers had just crossed a line that could never be uncrossed. Grace set down her tray of empty glasses with more force than necessary, the sound sharp enough to make several nearby guests look in her direction. She had heard enough. 20 years of professional service, of biting her tongue and accepting disrespect, of watching privileged children grow up without consequences. It all crystallized in this moment of pure, uncomplicated cruelty. The teenagers noticed Grace approaching, but dismissed her immediately. To them, she was just part of the scenery, another invisible service worker whose opinions and presence didn't matter. They had no idea they had just awakened something far more dangerous than they could imagine. Maya sat frozen in her wheelchair, the cruel words still echoing in her mind. She had been called names before, but never with such calculated viciousness, never in such a public setting where the cruelty felt amplified by the elegant surroundings. Grace Washington had spent decades perfecting the art of invisibility. As a Black woman working in service at an exclusive country club, she had learned to move through spaces without drawing attention, to anticipate needs without being asked, and to absorb insults without reacting. But Standing before these four privileged teenagers who had just called a disabled girl a cripple, every lesson in professional restraint was being tested. "Ma'am, we don't need help here," Amanda said dismissively, using the tone she had learned from her mother, polite on the surface but dripping with condescension. "This is a private matter between friends." Grace looked at Maya, whose face was flushed with humiliation and anger. The girl's hands were trembling slightly as she gripped her wheelchair's armrests, clearly fighting back tears. Grace recognized the look. It was the same expression she had seen on her own daughter's face years ago when bullies had targeted her for being different. "Friends don't call each other names like that," Grace said calmly, her voice carrying the authority of someone who had raised 3 children and dealt with difficult people for 2 decades. "And I don't think this young lady considers you her friends." Tyler stepped forward, his teenage arrogance fully on display. "Look, lady, we don't know who you are, but this isn't your business. We go to school with her, and we're just being honest about the situation." Grace studied Tyler's face, recognizing him as the son of Judge Richmond, a man she had served at countless club events. The family was known for their sense of entitlement and their belief that wealth and position granted them immunity from consequences. "Being honest?" Grace repeated, her eyebrows rising slightly. "Is that what you call telling someone they don't belong at a charity event designed to help people exactly like them?" Brittany shifted uncomfortably, suddenly, aware that their conversation was attracting more attention from nearby tables. Several adults had stopped their own conversations to watch the unusual sight of a service worker confronting the club's young elite. "She's making a scene," Brittany whispered to Jessica, as if Grace couldn't hear her. "Someone should tell her manager." Grace almost smiled at the threat. In her 20 years at the club, she had never received a single complaint about her work. She was known for her professionalism, her attention to detail, and her ability to handle difficult situations with grace and efficiency. Her supervisor trusted her judgment implicitly, and the club's management valued her experience far more than they valued these teenagers' opinions. "What's your name?" Grace asked Jessica directly, her tone shifting to something that reminded the girl uncomfortably of her own mother during moments of serious discipline. "I don't have to tell you that," Jessica replied, but her voice lacked its earlier confidence. Something about Grace's steady gaze was making her nervous. "Jessica Morrison," Maya said quietly, speaking for the first time since the cruel comment. "Her father is Dr. Morrison from the cardiology department." Grace nodded slowly, filing away the information. She knew Dr. Morrison by reputation, a skilled surgeon, but also a man known for his explosive temper and his belief that his professional success gave him the right to treat support staff however he pleased. "And you're Tyler Richmond, Brittany Walsh, and Amanda Foster," Grace continued, her memory for faces and names serving her well. "I've served your families at events for years. I've watched you grow up in these halls." The 4 teenagers exchanged nervous glances. The dynamic was shifting in a way they hadn't expected. Instead of being dismissed or ignored, they were being held accountable by someone they had never considered worthy of their attention. "So what?" Tyler said, trying to reclaim his bravado. "What are you going to do about it? You're just the help." The words hung in the air like a challenge, and Grace felt something inside her shift permanently. She had endured decades of casual racism, subtle insults, and dismissive treatment from people who saw her only as a uniform and a function. But this moment was different. This wasn't about her anymore. "Just the help," Grace repeated thoughtfully. "You're right about that. I am here to help. And right now, I'm going to help you understand something very important about consequences." Maya watched the exchange with growing amazement. She had expected another adult to either ignore the situation entirely or offer some meaningless platitudes about children being children. Instead, Grace was standing her ground with quiet dignity, refusing to be intimidated or dismissed. "Listen," Amanda said, attempting to take control of the situation with the same manipulative charm her mother used to navigate social conflicts. "I think there's been a misunderstanding. We weren't being mean to her. We were just pointing out that maybe she'd be more comfortable somewhere else." Grace's expression didn't change, but Maya noticed her posture straightening slightly, like a soldier preparing for battle. "More comfortable somewhere else," Grace repeated. "Because she uses a wheelchair." "Well, yes," Brittany said, apparently missing the danger in Grace's tone. I mean, it's obvious she can't really participate in normal social activities. It's actually kind of cruel to force her into situations where she doesn't fit in. Maya felt fresh anger rising in her chest. The teenagers were now pretending their cruelty had been motivated by concern for her well-being, a manipulation tactic that was almost worse than their original insults. I see, Grace said slowly. So when you called her a cripple, that was you looking out for her comfort? The word fell between them like a stone dropped into still water, creating ripples of discomfort that spread to nearby tables. Several adults who had been pretending not to listen suddenly found themselves unable to ignore the conversation. That's not. Jessica stammered, realizing for the first time that their private cruelty had become very public. You're taking things out of context. Grace stepped closer to the group, her professional demeanor intact, but her voice carrying unmistakable steel. The context is that 4 privileged teenagers decided to target someone who couldn't fight back. The context is that you chose cruelty when you could have chosen kindness. Maya felt tears threatening again, but for different reasons now. Someone was finally standing up for her, someone who understood what it meant to be dismissed and dehumanized by people who thought their position gave them the right to hurt others. You don't understand, Tyler said desperately. It's not like that. We go to school with her. We know her situation. We were just trying to help her see reality. Grace turned to Maya directly for the first time since the confrontation began. Sweetheart, do you feel like these people were trying to help you? Maya looked up at Grace, seeing genuine concern and respect in the older woman's eyes. It was such a contrast to the calculated cruelty she had been enduring that she almost started crying again. No, Maya said clearly, her voice stronger than it had been all evening. They were trying to hurt me. They wanted me to leave because they think I'm embarrassing. Grace nodded, then turned back to the 4 teenagers. There's your reality, direct from the person you claim to be helping. The conversation was now attracting serious attention from the adult guests. Dr. Chun had noticed the commotion and was making his way across the ballroom, his expression shifting from confusion to alarm as he recognized his daughter at the center of whatever was happening. Daddy's coming, Amanda whispered to her friends, nodding toward Dr. Chen's approach. Maybe we should go. Nobody's going anywhere, Grace said firmly. Not until this gets resolved properly. Jessica looked around desperately, suddenly, realizing that their casual cruelty was about to have real consequences. At school, this kind of behavior might earn them a mild lecture or detention. But here, in front of their parents' social and professional peers, the stakes were much higher. Look, maybe we said some things we shouldn't have, Brittany said, attempting damage control. But you're making this into a bigger deal than it needs to be. Grace studied Brittany's face, seeing not genuine remorse, but calculated self-preservation. A bigger deal than calling someone a cripple at a charity event for disabled children? I'm not sure that's possible. Dr. Chun reached the group, his medical training making him immediately assess the situation for signs of distress or conflict. He saw his daughter's flushed face, the defensive posture of the 4 teenagers, and Grace's protective stance. Maya, is everything all right? He asked, his voice gentle but concerned. Maya looked up at her father, then at Grace, then back at the teenagers who had been tormenting her. For a moment, she considered minimizing the situation, making it easier for everyone involved. But Grace's courage was infectious, and Maya found herself speaking with unexpected clarity. These students from my school were telling me I don't belong here because I use a wheelchair, Maya said clearly. They called me a cripple and said I was embarrassing my parents by being at this event. Dr. Chen's expression darkened as he processed his daughter's words. As a surgeon, he was accustomed to life and death decisions. But, as a father, he was discovering that protecting his daughter from cruelty required different skills entirely. Is this true? He asked the teenagers, his voice carrying the authority of someone accustomed to being obeyed without question. The 4 teenagers looked at each other desperately, realizing that their casual evening of entertainment was rapidly becoming a serious problem with potential consequences they hadn't considered. Grace watched Dr. Chen's reaction with interest. She had observed him at Dr. Michael Chun had performed thousands of surgeries, each one requiring absolute precision and calm under pressure. But, standing in the elegant ballroom watching his daughter's face, he felt his professional composure cracking. Maya's eyes held a mixture of hurt and anger that told him everything he needed to know about what had transpired while he was across the room. Yes, Maya said clearly, looking directly at Jessica. She called me a cripple. She said I was embarrassing everyone by being here, including you and Mom. The words seemed to echo in the space around them, drawing more attention from nearby guests. Dr. Chen felt something cold settle in his chest as he processed not just the cruelty of the insult, but the calculated nature of the attack on his daughter's deepest insecurities. Jessica's face went pale as she realized the full weight of her situation. Across the ballroom, her own father was engaged in conversation with potential donors, unaware that his daughter was about to become the center of a very public controversy. We were just... Jessica stammered, looking desperately at her friends for support. Grace watched the teenagers panic with the calm observation of someone who had seen countless moments of reckoning over the years. She had learned to read people quickly and accurately, and Jessica's body language told her everything she needed to know about the girl's character. Just what? Dr. Chen asked, his voice carrying the same precision he used when questioning medical students about their mistakes. You were just what exactly? Tyler stepped forward, attempting to salvage the situation with the same legal maneuvering he had observed in his father's courtroom. Dr. Chen, I think you're misunderstanding the situation. We know Maya from school. We were having a normal conversation that got blown out of proportion. Dr. Chen studied Tyler's face, recognizing the calculated manipulation behind his words. As a physician, he had developed an ability to detect deception, particularly when it came to patients trying to hide symptoms or minimize problems. A normal conversation, Dr. Chun repeated slowly. And, in this normal conversation, you felt it was appropriate to tell my daughter she doesn't belong at a charity event for disabled children? Brittany shifted nervously, her expensive jewelry catching the chandelier light as she fidgeted. Sir, we weren't trying to be mean. We were just pointing out that maybe she'd be more comfortable in a different environment. Grace felt her anger rising again at the teenager's continued manipulation. 20 years of watching privileged families operate had taught her to recognize every form of deflection and blame-shifting they employed when confronted with their behavior. More comfortable, Dr. Chen said, his voice dropping to the dangerous quiet he used when delivering devastating diagnoses. Because she uses a wheelchair. It's just that this is a very social event, Amanda said, attempting to sound reasonable and mature. People are dancing and moving around a lot. We thought maybe she felt left out. Maya looked up at her father, seeing the controlled fury building behind his professional exterior. She knew her father well enough to recognize when his patience was reaching its limit. Did you ask if I felt left out? Maya said suddenly, her voice cutting through Amanda's explanation. Or did you just assume that because I can't walk, I can't think or speak for myself? The question caught Amanda off guard, and she looked around desperately for support from her friends. But Tyler, Jessica, and Brittany were all focused on their own self-preservation, leaving her to handle Maya's challenge alone. Grace felt a surge of pride as she watched Maya find her voice. The girl was discovering that she didn't need anyone to rescue her. She just needed someone to stand beside her while she rescued herself. We were trying to be considerate, Amanda said weakly, her earlier confidence completely evaporating. Considerate, Maya repeated, her voice growing stronger with each word. By telling me I embarrass my parents? By saying disabled people should know their place? By calling me a cripple in front of everyone? Each question hit like a physical blow, and Dr. Chin watched his daughter's courage with amazement. He had always known Maya was intelligent and resilient, but he was seeing a side of her strength he had never witnessed before. Maya, Jessica began, apparently attempting some form of apology. Don't, Maya said firmly. Don't pretend you're sorry now that my father is here. You weren't sorry when you thought I was alone and couldn't defend myself. Grace nodded approvingly at Maya's response. The girl was learning one of life's most important lessons, that people who showed their true character when they thought no one important was watching were revealing exactly who they really were. Dr. Chin looked at each of the 4 teenagers, studying their faces with the same intensity he used when examining medical scans for signs of disease. What he saw was deeply troubling, not just cruelty, but a fundamental lack of empathy that suggested deeper character problems. "Where are your parents?" Dr. Chen asked quietly. The question sent a chill through the group. They had been hoping this confrontation could be contained, handled quietly without involving their families. Dr. Chen's question suggested that private resolution was no longer an option. "Sir, I really think we can work this out without getting our parents involved," Tyler said desperately. "Maybe we could all just agree that this was a misunderstanding." Dr. Chen studied Tyler with the same cold precision he used when confronting medical students who had made dangerous errors. "A misunderstanding," he repeated. "Is that what you call deliberate cruelty towards someone who couldn't fight back?" Grace watched the exchange with growing respect for Dr. Chen. She had served many wealthy families over the years, and most parents would have sought the path of least resistance, prioritizing social harmony over justice for their children. "These young people need to understand that their words have consequences," Grace said, speaking directly to Dr. Chen for the first time. "And their parents need to know what kind of behavior they're displaying in public." Dr. Chen looked at Grace with genuine appreciation, recognizing that this woman had stood up for his daughter when he hadn't been there to do it himself. "You're absolutely right. And I want to thank you for protecting Maya when I wasn't paying attention." Grace felt a moment of surprise at the genuine gratitude in his voice. Most of the club's members barely acknowledged her existence, treating her more like a piece of equipment than a person with thoughts and feelings. "That girl has more dignity in her little finger than all four of these teenagers combined," Grace said clearly. Someone needed to make sure they knew it. Maya looked between Grace and her father, feeling a complex mixture of emotions. She was grateful for their support, but she was also discovering her own capacity to stand up for herself. "I can speak for myself," Maya said, not with anger, but with quiet determination. "I want them to know exactly what they did and why it was wrong." Dr. Chen nodded, recognizing that his daughter needed this moment to reclaim her power from the people who had tried to diminish her. Maya looked at each of the four teenagers, taking her time to make eye contact with each one before speaking. "You saw someone different from you, and instead of being curious or kind, you decided to be cruel. You thought because I can't walk, I must not be worth treating with basic respect." Jessica squirmed under Maya's steady gaze, clearly uncomfortable with being forced to confront the reality of her behavior. "You made assumptions about what I can and can't do based on my wheelchair," Maya continued. "But you never asked me anything about myself. You don't know that I'm on the honor roll. You don't know that I volunteer at the animal shelter every weekend. You don't know that I'm learning 3 languages or that I've won art competitions." Brittany looked down at her expensive shoes, apparently unable to maintain eye contact with Maya's unwavering honesty. The walk across the ballroom felt like a march toward Judgment Day for the 4 teenagers. Dr. Chun moved with purpose, his medical training allowing him to navigate through crowds efficiently while maintaining his composure. Maya kept pace beside him in her wheelchair, her earlier vulnerability replaced by quiet determination. Grace followed at a respectful distance, her professional duties providing the perfect cover for witnessing what was about to unfold. Jessica Morrison spotted her father first, standing near the auction display with several other cardiologists. Dr. James Morrison was known throughout the medical community for his surgical skill and his explosive temper. He was currently explaining the finer points of a new cardiac procedure to a group of colleagues, his voice carrying the authority of someone accustomed to being the smartest person in any room. "Daddy," Jessica said quietly as they approached, hoping to somehow control the narrative before Dr. Chin could speak. Dr. Morrison looked up, his expression shifting from mild annoyance at being interrupted to confusion as he recognized Dr. Chun and Maya. Behind them stood the other 3 teenagers, looking like defendants awaiting sentencing. "Michael," Dr. Morrison said cordially, extending his hand to Dr. Chun. "Good to see you. I was just telling everyone about the new minimally invasive procedure we're implementing next month." Dr. Chun shook his colleague's hand, his professional courtesy intact despite the circumstances. "James, we need to talk about our children. Specifically, about what your daughter and her friends said to Maya tonight." Dr. Morrison's expression shifted slightly, his medical training making him immediately alert to the serious tone in Dr. Chen's voice. Around them, the other doctors began paying closer attention, sensing that a professional conversation was about to become something more personal. "I'm sure it's nothing serious," Dr. Morrison said, glancing at Jessica, who was looking increasingly pale. "Kids say things sometimes. What's this about?" Maya looked up at Dr. Morrison, seeing the same dismissive attitude in his face that she had encountered from his daughter. But now, with her father beside her and Grace watching nearby, she felt strong enough to speak her truth directly to the man who had raised one of her tormentors. "Your daughter called me a cripple," Maya said clearly, her voice carrying across the small group of doctors. "She told me I didn't belong at this event because I embarrass my parents and make other people uncomfortable." The words landed like a physical blow, and Dr. Morrison's face went through a series of expressions: surprise, disbelief, anger, and, finally, embarrassment. Around them, the other physicians fell silent, suddenly, uncomfortable with being witnesses to this very personal confrontation. "Jessica," Dr. Morrison said sharply, his voice carrying the same authority he used when addressing medical students who had made serious errors. "Is this true?" Jessica looked around desperately, searching for some escape from the situation. But her three friends were dealing with their own impending reckonings, and the circle of distinguished physicians made any denial seem foolish. "It wasn't like that," Jessica said weakly. "We were just talking, and things got misunderstood." Grace stepped forward slightly, her presence suddenly more noticeable as she moved from the background into the conversation. "Sir, I witnessed the entire interaction. There was no misunderstanding. Dr. Morrison looked at Grace with surprise, clearly not expecting a service worker to insert herself into a conversation between physicians. But something in Grace's tone and bearing commanded attention rather than dismissal. "I've worked here for 20 years, Grace continued, her voice calm but firm. "I've seen a lot of teenage behavior, but what your daughter and her friends did tonight crossed every line of basic human decency." Dr. Chin nodded toward Grace with genuine respect. "Grace protected Maya when I wasn't there to do it myself. I owe her a considerable debt of gratitude." The acknowledgement from Dr. Chin elevated Grace's status in the conversation, forcing Dr. Morrison to treat her words seriously rather than dismissing them as interference from staff. "What exactly did you witness?" Dr. Morrison asked Grace directly, his medical training making him seek detailed information before reaching any conclusions. Grace looked at Maya, who nodded encouragingly, then began recounting the evening's events with the precision of someone accustomed to observing details carefully. She described the teenagers' approach, their escalating cruelty, and the deliberate nature of their attack on Maya's dignity. "They specifically targeted her disability," Grace explained. "They told her she didn't belong in social situations, that she was embarrassing her family, and that disabled people should know their place." Each detail hit Dr. Morrison like a separate accusation, and he watched his daughter's face grow increasingly red with shame. Around them, the other physicians listened with growing discomfort, realizing they were witnessing the aftermath of behavior that reflected poorly on their entire social circle. "The word cripple was used deliberately," Grace continued. "It wasn't a slip of the tongue or a misunderstanding. It was chosen specifically to hurt and humiliate." Dr. Morrison looked at his daughter with an expression Maya had never seen before, disappointment mixed with genuine anger. "Jessica Marie Morrison, look at me." Jessica raised her eyes reluctantly, meeting her father's furious gaze. She had seen him angry before, but never with the cold control he was displaying now. "Did you call this young lady a cripple?" Dr. Morrison asked, his voice deadly quiet. Jessica's remaining defenses crumbled under her father's direct question. "Yes, but, nothing." Dr. Morrison cut her off. "Did you tell her she didn't belong at a charity event for disabled children?" "Daddy, you don't understand." "I understand perfectly," Dr. Morrison said, his voice carrying the same precision he used when delivering devastating medical diagnoses. "You deliberately targeted someone because of their disability, used cruel language to hurt them, and tried to make them feel unwelcome at an event specifically designed to support people like them." Maya watched the confrontation with a mixture of satisfaction and surprise. She had expected adult intervention to result in minimization and excuses. Instead, Dr. Morrison was holding his daughter accountable with the same intensity he would apply to a medical crisis. Grace observed the exchange with professional interest, noting how Dr. Morrison's anger was directed entirely at his daughter's behavior rather than at the people who had exposed it. It was a response she hadn't anticipated from someone in his position. "Where are the other parents?" Dr. Chin asked, looking around the ballroom for Judge Richmond, Mr. Walsh, and Mrs. Foster. Dr. Morrison followed his gaze, spotting Judge Richmond near the bar, Mr. Walsh examining auction items, and Mrs. Foster holding court near the main entrance. "This conversation needs to include all of them," he said grimly. Jessica looked around desperately as she realized her friend's parents were about to be drawn into the situation. At school, their behavior might have earned them detention or a lecture. But here, in front of their parents' professional and social peers, the consequences were going to be much more severe. "Dr. Morrison," Tyler said desperately, stepping forward with his best courtroom manner. "I think we could resolve this more quietly. Maybe our families could discuss this privately." Dr. Morrison looked at Tyler with the same expression he reserved for medical students who suggested cutting corners during surgery. Quietly, he repeated, "You think the solution to public cruelty is private conversation?" Grace felt a surge of respect for Dr. Morrison's response. She had expected him to prioritize social convenience over justice, but he was choosing accountability instead. "These young people need to understand that their actions have consequences," Dr. Morrison said, looking directly at Tyler. "And their families need to know what kind of behavior they're displaying in public." Maya felt something she hadn't experienced in years, the sense that adults were taking her side seriously instead of treating her concerns as minor inconveniences to be managed quietly. "I want them to apologize," Maya said suddenly, her voice clear and strong. "Not because they got caught, but because they understand what they did wrong." Dr. Chin looked at his daughter with pride, recognizing that she was learning to advocate for herself in ways that would serve her throughout her life. "A real apology," Maya continued, looking at each of the 4 teenagers in turn. "Not excuses." The gathering storm of parents created a tension in the ballroom that even the most oblivious guests couldn't ignore. Dr. Chun and Dr. Morrison approached Judge Richmond first, finding him regaling a small group with stories from his courtroom. The judge was an imposing figure, accustomed to commanding attention and respect, but his expression shifted quickly when he saw the serious faces approaching him. "Richard," Dr. Morrison said formally, using the judge's first name to signal the gravity of the situation. "We need to discuss Tyler's behavior tonight." Judge Richmond's legal training made him immediately alert to trouble involving his son. He had built his career on understanding when situations were about to become problematic, and everything about this approach suggested serious complications. "What kind of behavior?" Judge Richmond asked, his voice carrying the controlled authority he used in his courtroom. Dr. Chin stepped forward, his medical precision evident in how he presented the facts. "Tyler participated in a coordinated attack on my daughter Maya, targeting her specifically because she uses a wheelchair." The words hung in the air like an indictment, and Judge Richmond's expression shifted through several stages of reaction. As a judge, he had heard countless accusations, but having his own son accused of deliberate cruelty struck him with unexpected force. Tyler looked up at his father with growing panic, realizing that his casual evening of entertainment was about to collide with his father's reputation for zero tolerance toward bullies in his courtroom. "What exactly are you alleging?" Judge Richmond asked, slipping into his professional mode of seeking detailed evidence before reaching conclusions. Grace stepped forward again, her 20 years of observing wealthy families giving her insight into exactly how this conversation needed to proceed. "Your Honor, I witnessed the entire incident. The 4 teenagers targeted Maya Chin specifically because of her disability." Judge Richmond looked at Grace with surprise, recognizing her from years of club events, but never having heard her speak directly to him. Something in her tone commanded the same attention he gave to expert witnesses in his courtroom. "They told her she didn't belong at the event," Grace continued with careful precision. "They said she was embarrassing her family, and that disabled people should know their place. Tyler specifically participated in calling her a cripple." The final accusation hit Judge Richmond like a gavel blow. In his courtroom, he had sentenced people for hate crimes, and he recognized exactly what Grace was describing. "Tyler," Judge Richmond said, his voice carrying the same authority he used when addressing defendants. Is this accurate? Tyler looked around desperately, but there was no escape from his father's direct question. Judge Richmond's reputation for detecting deception made any attempt at denial foolish. It wasn't as bad as they're making it sound, Tyler said weakly, attempting damage control. That's not what I asked, Judge Richmond said sharply. Did you participate in calling a disabled girl a cripple at a charity event for disabled children? Tyler's shoulders sagged in defeat. Yes, sir. Judge Richmond closed his eyes briefly, as if absorbing a physical blow. In 30 years on the bench, he had prided himself on raising a son who understood the importance of justice and fairness. This moment was forcing him to confront the possibility that he had failed completely. Meanwhile, Dr. Chun had located Mr. Walsh near the auction displays. Robert Walsh was examining expensive artwork with the calculating eye of someone who measured everything in terms of investment potential. His business success had been built on understanding value and exploiting opportunities, but he was about to discover that his daughter's behavior represented a liability he couldn't calculate away. Robert, Dr. Chin said, approaching with the same serious demeanor he had used with Judge Richmond. We need to discuss Brittany's conduct tonight. Mr. Walsh looked up from the painting he was evaluating, his businessman's instincts immediately alert to potential problems. What kind of conduct issue are we talking about? Dr. Morrison joined the conversation, his anger still evident despite his professional composure. Your daughter participated in a coordinated attack on a disabled student. She helped call a girl in a wheelchair a cripple. Mr. Walsh's expression shifted quickly through surprise, disbelief, and calculation. As a businessman, he understood immediately that this kind of behavior could damage his family's reputation and social standing in ways that would affect his business relationships. Brittany, Mr. Walsh said sharply, turning to his daughter with the same intensity he used when discovering problems in his business operations. What the hell happened here? Brittany looked at her father with growing panic, recognizing the cold anger he displayed when business deals went wrong. She had seen him destroy partnerships and in relationships over much smaller issues than public embarrassment. Daddy, it wasn't as serious as they're making it sound, Brittany said desperately. We were just having a conversation that got misunderstood. Mr. Walsh studied his daughter's face with the same analytical skills he used to evaluate business proposals. Misunderstood how exactly? Grace appeared at the edge of the conversation, her professional duties providing perfect cover for ensuring all the parents heard the complete truth. Sir, there was no misunderstanding. I witnessed your daughter deliberately participating in targeting Maya-chan because of her disability. Mr. Walsh looked at Grace with the calculating assessment he applied to potential business partners. Something in her straightforward presentation style commanded credibility rather than dismissal. She specifically told Maya that disabled people should know their place, Grace continued. She actively participated in trying to make a teenage girl feel unwelcome at a charity event designed to help people exactly like her. Mr. Walsh felt something cold settle in his stomach as he processed the implications. His business success depended heavily on his reputation in the community, and having a daughter who bullied disabled children at charity events could destroy relationships he had spent decades building. Brittany and Walsh, Mr. Walsh said, using the full name formality that had always signaled serious trouble. Look at me and tell me the truth. Did you call that girl a cripple? Brittany met her father's gaze briefly, then looked away, unable to maintain eye contact under his angry assessment. Yes, but everyone was doing it. Everyone was doing it, Mr. Walsh repeated, his voice carrying the same disgust he reserved for business partners who had betrayed his trust. That's your excuse for bullying a disabled child? The final parent to be confronted was Mrs. Foster, Amanda's mother, and the country club's social coordinator. She was holding court near the main entrance, discussing upcoming events with several other club officers. Her position required her to be diplomatic and socially adept, but she was about to face a situation that would test every skill she possessed. Margaret, Dr. Chun said as he approached with the growing group of parents and teenagers. We need to discuss Amanda's behavior toward my daughter tonight. Mrs. Foster's social training made her immediately alert to the serious tone and the unusual gathering. She prided herself on reading social situations quickly and Everything about this approach suggested a significant problem requiring careful management. I'm sure whatever happened can be resolved quietly, Mrs. Foster said, automatically moving into damage control mode. Children sometimes say things they don't mean. Dr. Morrison stepped forward, his anger making him less willing to accept diplomatic solutions. Your daughter participated in calling a disabled girl a cripple at a charity event. This isn't something that can be managed quietly. Mrs. Foster's carefully maintained composure cracked slightly as she processed the accusation. Her role as social coordinator meant she understood exactly how damaging this kind of behavior could be to the club's reputation and her own position. Amanda, Mrs. Foster said, turning to her daughter with growing alarm. Please tell me this is some kind of misunderstanding. Amanda looked at her mother desperately, recognizing the panic behind her carefully controlled expression. Mother, we were just trying to help her understand that maybe she'd be more comfortable somewhere else. Mrs. Foster studied her daughter's explanation with the same skill she used to navigate complex social situations. But Grace's presence at the edge of the conversation made any attempt at spinning the narrative seem futile. Mrs. Foster, Grace said respectfully but firmly, I witnessed the entire incident. Your daughter actively participated in targeting Maya-chan because of her disability. There was nothing helpful about their behavior. Mrs. Foster looked at Grace with surprise, realizing that the club's most experienced and respected service worker was serving as a witness against her daughter. Grace's reputation for professionalism and honesty made her testimony impossible to dismiss or discredit. Maya sat in her wheelchair at the center of the growing circle, watching as each parent processed the reality of their children's behavior. She felt a complex mixture of satisfaction, nervousness, and something she couldn't quite identify. The sense that this moment was changing not just the evening, but potentially much more. I want to hear it directly, Maya said suddenly, her voice cutting through the adults' conversation. From each of them, not explanations or excuses, but acknowledgement of what they actually said and did. The request surprised everyone, including her father, but Dr. Chen recognized the strength and wisdom behind it. Maya was taking control of her own situation, demanding accountability on her own terms. Judge Richmond looked at his son with an expression that Tyler had never seen before, disappointment mixed with genuine anger. Tyler, you will apologize to Miss Chen properly, and then we will discuss what happens next. The four teenagers looked at each other, realizing that their parents were not going to minimize their behavior or make it disappear quietly. They were about to face real consequences for their cruelty, and no amount of privilege or position was going to protect them from accountability. Grace continued her work nearby, but she stayed close enough to ensure that Maya's courage resulted in genuine change rather than empty apologies designed to make the problem disappear. This moment represented something larger than just one evening's cruelty. It was about whether people would be held accountable for their actions regardless of their position or privilege. Maya straightened in her wheelchair, preparing to hear what she hoped would be genuine recognition of the harm that had been done. But, more importantly, she was discovering that she had the strength to demand the respect and dignity she deserved, no matter who tried to deny it to her. Misunderstandings or explanations about what you really meant. An acknowledgement that you chose to be cruel when you could have chosen to be kind. Jessica opened her mouth to speak, but Dr. Morrison held up his hand to stop her. Before anyone apologizes, we're going to have a complete conversation with all the parents involved. This isn't going to be handled with quick words and forgotten by tomorrow. Grace began collecting glasses from nearby tables, but she stayed close enough to hear the continuing conversation. She wanted to ensure that Maya's courage wasn't wasted and that real change resulted from this confrontation. I'll get the other parents, Dr. Chen said, his voice carrying the determination of someone who had made an important decision. This conversation is going to happen properly, with everyone involved understanding exactly what occurred here tonight. Maya straightened in her wheelchair, feeling the power that came from being supported by adults who took her dignity seriously. Whatever happened next, she knew this moment marked a turning point, not just in how others treated her, but in how she saw herself. The teenagers looked at each other with growing panic as they realized their parents were about to learn exactly what kind of people they had raised. Across the ballroom, Judge Richmond, Mr. Walsh, and Mrs. Foster continued their evening, unaware that their children's behavior was about to become the center of a very public reckoning. Grace watched Dr. Chun and Dr. Morrison walk toward the other parents, feeling a sense of satisfaction that accountability was finally coming for the privileged teenagers who had thought their cruelty would go unnoticed and unpunished. "You decided I was less than you because I'm different," Maya said, her voice growing stronger with each word. "But the truth is, I would never treat anyone the way you treated me tonight. That makes you less than me, not the other way around." The statement hung in the air like a verdict, and Grace felt a surge of pride at Maya's articulate defense of her own worth. The girl was learning to fight for herself in the most powerful way possible, with truth and dignity. Dr. Chen looked at his daughter with amazement, realizing that while he had been protecting her from physical challenges her entire life, she had been developing the emotional strength to handle much more complex battles. "Now, Dr. Chen said, turning back to the 4 teenagers, let's find your parents and have a proper conversation about what happened here tonight." The teenagers looked at each other with growing panic, realizing that their evening of casual cruelty was about to have consequences they had never imagined. Across the ballroom, their parents continued their own conversations, unaware that their children's behavior was about to become a very public problem. Grace began collecting empty glasses from nearby tables, her professional duties calling her back to work. But she moved slowly, staying close enough to ensure that Maya's courage wasn't wasted and that the teenagers faced real accountability for their actions. Maya straightened in her wheelchair, feeling something she hadn't experienced in years, the power that came from standing up for herself with dignity and truth. Whatever happened next, she knew she had found her voice, and she would never let anyone silence it again. Medical conferences and charity events for years, noting his reputation for brilliance and his genuine dedication to helping patients. Now she would see what kind of man he was when his own family was under attack. "Sir, I think there's been some confusion," Tyler said, attempting to use his father's legal training to navigate the situation. "We were having a casual conversation that maybe got misinterpreted." Dr. Chen looked at his daughter, whose intelligence and honesty he trusted implicitly, then at the 4 teenagers who were clearly attempting to minimize their behavior. "Maya doesn't misinterpret conversations," he said quietly. "She's one of the most perceptive people I know. So I'm going to ask you one more time. Did you call my daughter a cripple?" The question hung in the air like a sword, and Grace realized that Dr. Chun was about to learn exactly what his daughter had endured while he was across the room networking with other professionals. Maya looked up at Grace, drawing strength from the older woman's unwavering support, and prepared to tell her father exactly what had happened while he was too busy to notice his daughter was under attack. "Did you just call her a cripple?" Grace asked quietly, her voice carrying a dangerous edge that made the teenagers finally notice her presence. Jessica straightened up, her confidence faltering slightly at the unexpected interruption. "Excuse me, but this is a private conversation." Grace stepped closer, her years of professional training warring with her human instincts. She looked at Maya, seeing not just a disabled teenager, but someone's daughter, someone who deserved basic human dignity regardless of her physical limitations. "I heard what you said," Grace continued, her voice growing stronger with each word. "All of you. And I want you to think very carefully about what happens next." The 4 teenagers exchanged glances, suddenly uncertain. They were accustomed to adults either ignoring their behavior or offering only mild corrections. Grace's tone suggested something entirely different was about to unfold.